It's your boy, Isaac Anzu. That's right. I am in my... Here, let me step up front here. I'm in my Halloween costume. How does it look? Pretty good, huh? It's hard, a little hard to breathe in here. Yep, but this is my Halloween costume. Happy Halloween. It's time for the Halloween half horror, half month haute couture. And the haute couture is this costume. I know, a haute couture is not an event. But there's not really an event that starts with H, is there? Half birthday? It's not my half birthday though. Quinceanera, hell, high, half, hub. Well, don't worry about it. This is the costume I'm wearing, and I think it's pretty cool looking. It's kind of cramped in here, but we're making it work. Let's settle in. Today is the start of the Halloween horror half month haute couture. For the next 2 weeks or so, we'll be doing Halloween themed streams. Ooh. And I hope that you're prepared. Because we are, I did not realize how strong we were kicking things off. But we are kicking things off strong. We're going to be starting with some creepy Wikipedia article reading. That's right. Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia. I'm going to be reading some articles today and perhaps doing it in a spooky voice, depending on the content. But yeah. Normally these Wikipedia streams jump from topic to topic based on whatever I'm interested in. So be prepared for tangents and looking things up that I don't understand, and generally a chill but creepy time. So, let's get started. Oh, it's probably bright. Is there not a dark mode for Wikipedia yet? Settings. No. All right. We're starting with the strange story of the French showman and soldier named Tarare. He was noted for his unusual appetite and eating habits. Able to eat vast amounts of meat, he was constantly hungry. His parents could not provide for him, and he was turned out of the family home as a teenager. He'd travel France in the company of a band of prostitutes and thieves before becoming the warm-up act for a traveling charlatan. In this act, he swallowed corks, stones, live animals, and a whole basket full of apples. He then took this act to Paris, where he worked as a street performer. At the start of the War of the First Coalition, Tarare joined the French Revolutionary Army, where even quadrupling the standard military ration was unable to satisfy his large appetite. He ate any available food from gutters, rubbish heaps, but his condition still deteriorated through hunger. He was hospitalized due to exhaustion and became the subject of a series of medical experiments to test his eating capacity, in which, among other things, He ate a meal intended for 15 people in a single sitting. He ate live cats, snakes, lizards, puppies, and swallowed eels whole without chewing. Despite his unusual diet, he was underweight, and with the exception of his eating habits, he showed no signs of mental illness other than what was described as an apathetic temperament. General Alexander de Beauharnais decided to put Tarar's abilities to military use. Now there's a sentence. And employed him as a courier for the French army, with the intention that he would swallow documents, pass through enemy lines, and recover them from his stool once safely at his destination. Tarar could not speak German, and on his first mission he was captured by Prussian forces, severely beaten, and subjected to a mock execution before returning to French lines. Yo, how are you today, Sir Isaac? Welcome, Venom. Today we're reading creepy Wikipedia articles. There's some seriously crazy stuff on Wikipedia, so we're starting out strong. This is the story of Tarar, a man who couldn't stop eating. Chastened by this experience, he agreed to submit to any procedure that might cure his appetite, and was treated with laudanum, tobacco pills, wine vinegar, and soft-boiled eggs. The procedures failed, and doctors could not keep him on a controlled diet. He snuck out of the hospital to scavenge for offal in gutters, rubbish heaps, and outside butcher shops, and attempted to drink the blood of other patients in the hospital and to eat the corpses in the hospital's morgue. After being suspected of eating a 1-year-old toddler, he was ejected from the hospital. He reappeared 4 years later in Versailles with a severe case of tuberculosis and died shortly afterwards, following a lengthy bout of exudative diarrhea. Creepy awesome. We have a haunted castle here, supposedly. That is awesome. I am planning on doing a stream next week. Actually, this day next week, where we're going to look up some haunted locations on Google Maps. Ooh, haunted. Also, you like my costume? Look at it. I'm Minion from the hit movie Megamind. I also have a new redeem where you can make Minion. It's a Minion soundboard redeem, really, and I'm hoping that some of them will be appropriate to what I'm doing.
Wait a minute. Are you wearing Jean-Paul Gaultier's Parfum?
Parfum? Indeed. I am not wearing Jean-Paul Gaultier's Parfum. Let's get some creepy details. As a child, Tarar had a huge appetite, and by his teens he could eat a quarter of a bullock being a cow, holy shit, weighing as much as Tarar himself in a single day. He ate ravenously and was particularly fond of snake meat. In 1788, Tarar moved to Paris to work as a street performer. He appears to have been successful in general, but on one occasion, the act went wrong, and he suffered severe intestinal obstruction. Members of the crowd carried him to the Hotel Dieu hospital, where he was treated with powerful laxatives. He made a full recovery and offered to demonstrate his act by eating his surgeon's watch and chain. M. Garaud, the surgeon, was unimpressed by the offer and warned him that if he did so, he would cut Tarar open to recover the items. Whoa. Despite his unusual diet, Tarar was slim and of average height. At the age of 17, he weighed only 100 pounds. He was described as having unusually soft fair hair and an abnormally wide mouth, 4 inches between his jaws when his mouth was fully extended. Jesus. I'm measuring my own mouth right now. Okay, that's pretty big. In which his teeth were heavily stained and on which the lips were almost invisible. Who the fuck wrote this article? Because they are killing it right now. When he had not eaten, his skin hung so loosely that he could wrap the folds of skin from his abdomen around his waist. When full, his abdomen distended like a huge balloon. The skin of his cheeks were wrinkled and hung loosely. And when stretched out, he could hold 12 eggs or apples in his mouth. Good God. This is the type of guy who doesn't peel his hard-boiled eggs, for sure. His body was hot to the touch, and he sweated heavily. He had constantly foul body odor. He was described as stinking to such a degree that he could not be endured within a distance of 20 paces. And this is in France. This smell became noticeably worse after he had eaten. His eyes and cheeks became bloodshot. Oh, should I? You know what? Tell me if that changes the quality of my voice any. I just turned off my noise filter so we can get a little bit more ASMR in here. The smell became noticeably worse after he had eaten. His eyes and cheeks became bloodshot. A visible vapor rose from his body. Good God. He became lethargic, during which time he belched noisily, and his jaws made swallowing motions. He had chronic diarrhea, which was said to be fetid beyond all conception. I bet. Despite his large intake of food, he did not appear either to vomit excessively or to gain weight. Aside from his eating habits, his contemporaries saw no apparent signs of mental illness. The cause of the behavior is unknown. Hyperthyroidism can induce an extreme appetite, rapid weight loss, profuse sweating, heat intolerance, and fine hair. So, possibly. Let's read about his death. 4 years later, in 1978, an M. Tessier of Versailles Hospital contacted Percy to notify him that a patient of theirs wished to see him. It was Terrar, now bedridden and weak. Terrar told Percy that he had swallowed a golden fork 2 years earlier, which he believed was lodged inside him and causing his current weakness. He had hoped that Percy could find some way to remove it. Percy, however, recognized that he had advanced tuberculosis. A month later, Terrar began to experience continuous diarrhea, dying shortly afterwards. The corpse rotted quickly. The surgeons of the hospital refused to dissect it. Ooh, the fork was never found. We'll skip over the description of the autopsy. Okay. So that's the first one. Time for number 2. This is the story of H.H. Holmes. I actually read a book about this guy, Devil in the White City. Herman Webster Mudgett, better known as Dr. Henry Howard Holmes, was an American con artist and serial killer active between 1891 and 1894. By the time of his execution in 1896, Holmes had engaged in a lengthy criminal career that included insurance fraud, forgery, swindling, 3 to 4 bigamous illegal marriages, horse theft, and murder. And you know how these stories go. They got him on the horse theft. His most notorious crimes took place in Chicago around the time of the World's Columbian Exposition in 1893. And that's actually what the book is about. It's about the World Fair. and how he kind of used it at the same time to.
Sir, you really need to empty your pockets more often.
This guy needs to empty his pockets of all the murder. Despite his confession of 27 murders, including some people who were verifiably still alive, Holmes was convicted and sentenced to death for only one murder, that of business partner and accomplice Benjamin Peitzel. It is believed that he also killed 3 of Peitzel's children, as well as 3 mistresses, the child of one mistress and the sister of another. Holmes was hanged on May 7th, 1896. Much of the lore attributed to Holmes concerns the so-called Murder Castle, a 3-story building he commissioned in Chicago. Details about the building, along with many of his alleged crimes, are considered exaggerated or fabricated for sensationalistic tabloid pieces. Some accounts estimating his body count could be as high as from 133 to perhaps 200. Many of these inaccuracies have persisted due to the combination of ineffective police investigation and hyperbolic yellow journalism of the period, which are often cited as historical record. Murder in his pockets. He got murder in his pockets. Holmes gave various contradictory accounts of his life, initially claiming innocence and later claiming that he was possessed by Satan. His propensity for lying made it difficult for researchers to obtain the truth on the basis of his statements. For example, he claimed that one of his first murdered victims was a medical school classmate, Dr. Robert Leacock, in 1886, for the insurance money. In fact, Dr. Leacock died in Watford, Ontario, Canada, October 5th, 1889. Still intrigued by Jack the Ripper? We do have an article regarding Jack the Ripper on this very list, which we will get to. We can do it next even if you would like. Since the 1990s, Holmes has often been described as a serial killer. In his book about Holmes, author Adam Seltzer writes, is this Devil in the White City? No. H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil. Oh, I love the new citation style. Let's go Wikipedia. Get it. This is the mobile site, so maybe that's not true on the desktop site, but I love the pop-up notification. Just killing several people isn't necessarily enough for most definitions of a serial killer. More often, it has to be a series of similar crimes, committed over a period of time, usually more to satisfy a psychological urge on the killer's part than any more practical motive. He added, the murders we can connect Holmes to generally had a clear motive. Someone knew too much, or was getting in his way, or couldn't be trusted. The murders weren't simply for the love of bloodshed, but a necessary part of furthering his swindling operations and protecting his lifestyle. Can you hear my cat scratching in the background? Now that I've turned the noise filter off, maybe? All right, let's read about Illinois and the Murder Castle. Holmes arrived in Chicago in August 1886, which is when he began using the pseudonym H.H. Holmes. Soon after his arrival, he came across a drugstore at the northwest corner of South Wallace Avenue and West 63rd Street in Englewood. The drugstore's owner, Elizabeth Holton, gave Holmes a job. He proved to be a hard-working employee, eventually buying the store. Contrary to several accounts, Holmes did not kill Dr. E.S. Holton. Holmes purchased an empty lot across the street, where construction began in 1887 for a 2-story mixed-use building with apartments on the second floor and retail spaces, including a new drugstore, on the first. When Holmes declined to pay the architects for the steel company, Athena Iron and Steel, they took him to court in 1888. In 1892, he added a third floor, telling investors and suppliers he intended to use it as a hotel during the upcoming World's Columbian Exposition. which is the World's Fair in Chicago, which, believe it or not, is where Pabst Blue Ribbon was debuted. The beer, PBR, great beer. Contemporary accounts report that Holmes built the hotel to lure in tourists visiting the exposition in order to kill them and sell their skeletons to nearby medical schools. Although he did have a history of selling stolen cadavers to medical schools, Holmes had acquired these wares through grave robbing rather than murder. Likewise, there is no evidence that Holmes ever murdered exposition goers on the premises. The yellow press labeled the building as Holmes's murder castle, claiming the structure contained secret torture chambers, trapdoors, gas chambers, and a basement crematorium. None of these sensationalized claims were true. Other accounts stated that the hotel was made up of over 100 rooms and laid out like a maze, with doors opening into brick walls, windowless rooms, and dead-end staircases. In reality, the third-floor hotel was moderately sized, largely unremarkable, and uncompleted due to Holmes' disputes with the builders.
I'm calling it the Black Mamba.
Black Mamba is probably a better name than Murder Castle. Although they're close, right? I wonder if Megamind ever created a murder castle. It did contain some hidden rooms, but they were used for hiding furniture Holmes bought on credit and did not attempt to pay for. My man. Holmes did not kill an alleged castle victim, Miss Kate Durkee, who turned out to be very much alive. In his confession, Holmes' usual murder method was suffocation of his victims, including an overdose of chloroform, overexposure to light and gas fumes, trapped in an airless vault, to give some examples. Holmes also claimed to have used starvation and burning victims alive in his castle. What's up, Crundle? I hope you're ready for some creepy stuff. So there's many presumed and suspected murders. I'm shaking in my boots. Do you like my costume, by the way? There's a redeem for minion lines. Oh, it was you who redeemed the minion line. I see. All right, let's read about Julia Smythe. Holmes' mistress, 31-year-old Julia Smythe, was the wife of Dr. Lawrence Illicus Ned Connor, who had moved into Holmes' building and began working at his pharmacy's jewelry counter. After Connor found out about Smythe's affair with Holmes, he quit his job and moved away, leaving Smythe and their 5-year-old daughter Pearl Connor behind. Smythe gained custody of Pearl and remained at the hotel, continuing her relationship with Holmes. Julia and Pearl both disappeared on Christmas Eve of 1891. Holmes initially claimed to acquaintances that Julia had left unexpectedly to visit her dying sister, but then changed his story and said that she had fled her former husband. Ultimately, Holmes later claimed that Julia had actually died during an abortion. Despite his medical background, Holmes was unlikely to be experienced in carrying out abortions, and mortality from such a procedure was high at that time. Holmes then claimed to have poisoned Pearl, likely to hide the circumstances of her mother's death. A partial skeleton, possibly of a child around Pearl's age, was found when excavating Holmes's cellar. Pearl's father was a key witness at Holmes' trial in Chicago. That's dark. Let's read about a suspected murder. A 68-year-old creditor of Holmes named John de Breuil died of apoplexy on April 17, 1891 in the Castle drugstore. De Breuil collapsed and died shortly after Holmes poured a black liquid down his throat, according to a witness. Foul play was not suspected. In 1895, it was determined that de Breuil's life had been insured and that Holmes had profited from his death. That's some foul play right there. And here's the Peetzel killings. While working in the Chemical Bank building on Dearborn Street, Holmes met and became close friends with 38-year-old Benjamin Freeland Peetzel, a carpenter with a criminal past who was exhibiting in the same building a coal bin that he had invented. Holmes used Peitzel as his right-hand man for several criminal schemes. A district attorney later described Peitzel as Holmes's tool, his creature. With insurance companies pressing...
Doesn't even make any sense.
Yeah, that's true. Why would this criminal past man do even more crime? Well, maybe Holmes was threatening him. But it's kind of interesting that the man with the murder castle has his kind of Igor. You know, he's a doctor with a murder castle, and he has a creature-like assistant. It actually makes perfect sense. With insurance companies pressing to prosecute him for arson. Ooh. Oh no. Hey, how are you? Just popping in to say I love the Avatar. Well, thank you. Have you seen Hava? What's Hava? Have a great stream and a better day. Got him. Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, thanks for popping in. I'm in my Halloween costume right now, but other than that, we're chilling and just reading creepy Wikipedia articles. So Holmes left Chicago in July 1894 to flee from insurance companies. He reappeared in Fort Worth, Indiana? Texas, Fort Worth, Texas, where he had inherited property from the Williams sisters at the intersection of modern-day Commerce Street and 2nd Street. Here, he once again attempted to build an incomplete structure without paying his suppliers and contractors. So does hydrate count since you're in a water helmet? Well, okay. In order to survive in this water helmet, I've had to shapeshift myself a pair of gills. You can't see them, they're underneath the collar. But suffice to say, I'm using the gills for breathing, and hydration will still be required. In July 1984, Holmes was arrested and briefly jailed for the first time on the charge of selling mortgaged goods in St. Louis, Missouri. He was promptly bailed out, but while in jail, he struck up a conversation with convicted outlaw Marion Hedgepath, who was serving a 25-year sentence. Holmes had concocted a plan to swindle an insurance company out of $10,000 by taking out a policy on himself and then faking his death. Holmes promised Hedgepath a $500 commission in exchange for the name of a lawyer who could be trusted. Holmes was directed to a young St. Louis attorney named Jephthah Hoe. Hoe thought Holmes' scheme was brilliant and agreed to play a part. Nevertheless, Holmes' plan to fake his own death failed when the insurance company became suspicious and refused to pay. Holmes did not press the claim. Instead, he concocted a similar plan with Peitzel. Peitzel agreed to fake his own death so that his wife could collect $10,000 on a life insurance policy, which he was to split with Holmes and Hoe. The scheme, which was to take place in Philadelphia. Actually, before we get any further with this, let's look up the inflation calculator. We're looking at $10,000 in September 1984. Oh, it doesn't even go back that far. 1894. It doesn't even go back that far. How much money are we talking? Okay, so they're talking about splitting the equivalent of $300,000 at least, probably more, because this inflation calculator doesn't even go back to 1894. Incredible. All right, so $10,000, a big deal. The scheme, which was to take place in Philadelphia, called for Peitzel to set himself up as an inventor under the name of B.F. Perry and then be killed and disfigured in a lab explosion. Holmes was to find an appropriate cadaver to play the role of Peitzel. Instead, Holmes killed Peitzel on September 4th, 1894, by knocking him unconscious with chloroform and setting his body on fire with the use of benzene. In his confession, Holmes implied Peitzel was still alive after he used the chloroform on him, before he set him on fire. However, forensic evidence presented at Holmes' later trial showed that chloroform had been administered after Peitzel's death, a fact of which the insurance company wasn't aware, presumably to stage a suicide to exonerate Holmes should he be charged with murder. The betrayal. Holmes collected the insurance payout on the basis of the genuine Peitzel corpse. Holmes then went on to manipulate Peitzel's unsuspecting wife, Carrie Alice Canning, into allowing 3 of her 5 children to be placed in his custody. The 3 children who were placed under Holmes's care were the 13-year-old Alice Peitzel, the 9-year-old Nellie Peitzel, and the 7-year-old Howard Robert Peitzel. Holmes and the 3 Peitzel children traveled throughout the northern United States and into Canada. Simultaneously, he escorted Carrie along a parallel route, all while using various aliases and lying to Carrie concerning her husband's death by claiming Peitzel was hiding in London, as well as lying to her about the true whereabouts of her 3 missing children. In Detroit, just before entering Canada, they were only separated by a few blocks. This dude's a kidnapper of kids. In an even more audacious move, Holmes was staying at another location with his current wife, who was unaware of the whole affair. How the fuck did this guy pull this off? He had the kids in one house, the mom in the other house, and his wife in a third house. Goddamn. Oh wait, never mind. He didn't have to look after the kids. Holmes later confessed to murdering Alice and Nellie on October 25th, 1894, by forcing them into a large trunk and locking them inside. He drilled a hole in the lid of the trunk and put one end of a hose through the hole, attaching the other end to a gas line to asphyxiate the girls. Holmes buried their nude bodies in the cellar of his rental house at 16 Vincent Street in Toronto. Frank Geyer, a Philadelphia police detective assigned to investigate Holmes and find the 3 missing children, found the decomposed bodies of the 2 Peitzel girls in the cellar of the Toronto home. Detective Geyer wrote, "The deeper we dug, the more horrible the odor became, and when we reached the depth of 3 feet, we discovered what appeared to be the bone of the forearm of a human being." Geyer then went to Indianapolis, where Holmes had rented a cottage. Holmes was reported to have visited a local pharmacy to purchase the drugs which he had used to kill Howard Peitzel on October 10th, 1894, and a repair shop to sharpen the knives he used to chop up the body before he burned it. The boy's teeth and bone were discovered in the Holmes chimney. And here we get a picture of Detective Frank Geyer. How the hell did he get away with all that for so long? I imagine some of these situations are so outlandish that people would take a more reasonable but untrue explanation at face value. You know? Holmes' murder spree finally ended when he was arrested in Boston on November 17th, 1894, after being tracked there from Philadelphia by the private Pinkerton National Detective Agency. Oh, the Pinkertons. Wow. Well, I guess they play a part in this story. He was held on an outstanding warrant for horse theft. I knew it! I knew he was arrested for the horse thievery in Texas because the authorities had become more suspicious at this point, and Holmes appeared poised to flee the country in the company of his unsuspecting 3rd wife. Holy shit, this guy had so many wives. But let's be real. If you see someone whose rap sheet is like murder, arson, kidnapping, fraud, and also horse theft, you know he got caught on the horse theft, right? It's like how Al Capone got caught on like tax evasion. Not the murder, not the drug smuggling, not the bootlegging, the tax evasion, right? It's the little things that you don't even think will matter will get you. They held him on an outstanding warrant for horse theft. Absolutely incredible. In July 1895, following the discovery of Alice and Nellie's bodies, Chicago police and reporters began investigating Holmes's building in Englewood, now locally referred to as the Castle. Though many sensational claims were made, no evidence was found which could have convicted Holmes in Chicago, excuse me. As there were only very circumstantial physical evidence of the Castle victims, pieces of human bones, possibly from Julia Connor, remains of a child, possibly Pearl Connor, a burned gold watch chain and burned dress buttons, apparently belonging to Minnie Williams, a tuft of female hair found in a chimney flue. Thus, Holmes would be tried for the murder of Petzel in Philadelphia, which had the clearest case for murder. So, there was evidence of human body parts all throughout the castle, but it's all suspected murders because nothing was identifiable enough. And let's just be clear, nothing was identifiable enough, like, over, like, between 1 and 3 years after the murder took place. In October 1895, Holmes was put on trial for the murder of Benjamin Petzel and was found guilty and sentenced to death. By then, it was evident that Holmes had also murdered the 3 missing Petzel children. Following his conviction, Holmes confessed to 27 murders in Chicago, Indianapolis, and Toronto, and 6 attempted murders. Holmes was paid $7,500, that's quite a lot of money, by the Hearst newspapers in exchange for his confession. While writing his confessions in prison, Holmes mentioned how drastically his facial appearance has changed since his imprisonment. On May 7, 1896, Holmes was hanged at Moyamensing Prison for the murder of Petzel. Until the moment of his death, Holmes remained calm and amiable, showing very few signs of fear, anxiety, or depression. Despite this, he asked for his coffin to be contained in concrete and buried 10 feet deep because he was concerned grave robbers would steal his body and use it for dissection. Holmes' neck did not break. Instead, he strangled to death slowly, twitching for over 15 minutes before being pronounced dead. On March 7th, 1914, the Chicago Tribune reported that with the death of Patrick Quinlan, the former caretaker of the castle, the mysteries of Holmes Castle would remain unexplained. Quinlan had committed suicide by taking strychnine. His body was found in his bedroom with a note that read, "I couldn't sleep." Quinlan's surviving relatives claimed that he had been haunted for several months and was suffering from hallucinations. So the castle may be haunted. The castle itself was damaged by a fire in August 1895. 2 men were seen entering the back of the building between 9 p.m. About half an hour later, they were seen exiting the building and rapidly running away. Following several explosions, the castle went up in flames. The site is currently occupied by the Englewood branch of the United States Postal Service. Oh, but it was torn down and rebuilt. Got it. In popular culture, yep. 2003, Eric Larson's Devil in White City. This is the book that I read. And apparently, it had a film adaptation get off the ground, but Scorsese and DiCaprio were in charge of it, but didn't get off the ground. Damn. All right. Next one we can do about Jack the Ripper. Okay. Yeah, that's what I thought. All right. This is the From Hell letter. The From Hell letter, also known as the Lusk letter, was a letter sent alongside half of a preserved human kidney to George Lusk, the chairman of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, in October 1888. The author of this letter claimed to be the unidentified serial killer known as Jack the Ripper, who had murdered and mutilated at least 4 women in the Whitechapel and Spitalfields district of London in the 2 months prior to Lusk receiving this letter, and whose vigilance committee Lusk led in civilian efforts to assist police in efforts to identify and apprehend the perpetrator. The letter was postmarked on 15th October 1888 and was received by Lusk the following day. An examination of the kidney revealed the individual from whom the organ originated had suffered from Bright's disease. The author of this letter claimed to have fried and eaten the other half. Police, press, and public alike received many letters complaining to be from the Whitechapel murderer, with investigations at one stage having to deal with an estimated 1,000 letters related to the case. However, the From Hell letter is one of the few articles of correspondence that has received serious consideration as to being actually genuine. Nonetheless, opinions remain divided with regards to the letter's authenticity. The murders committed by Jack the Ripper have attracted much attention in popular culture for decades, with several factual and fictional works directly making reference to the From Hell letter. The murder of Mary Ann Nichols on 31st August 1888 resulted in media attention focusing on the individual known as the Whitechapel murderer and later Leather Apron. The grotesque mutilation upon Nichols and later victims was generally described as involving their bodies having been ripped up, and residents spoke of their worries of a Ripper or High Rip gang. However, the identification of the killer as Jack the Ripper did not occur until 27th September, when the offices of Central News Limited received the Dear Boss letter. The author of this letter signed the letter, "Yours truly, Jack the Ripper," vowing to continue ripping prostitutes until his arrest. See, okay, they changed the word prostitutes here. Here's the Dear Boss letter. The author of this letter also threatened to remove and post the ears of his next victims to the police. While newsmen considered this letter a mere joke, they decided after 2 days to notify Scotland Yard of the matter. The double murder of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Edowis took place the night that the police received the Dear Boss letter. The Central News people received a second communication known as the Saucy Jackie postcard. Okay, we're looking up all these. On 1st October 1888, the day after the double murder, and the message was duly passed over to the authorities. Copies of both messages were soon posted to the public in the hopes that the writing style would be recognized. While the police felt determined to discover the author of both messages, they found themselves overwhelmed by the media circus around the Ripper killings and soon received a large amount of material, most of it useless. So let's read the Dear Boss letter. The Dear Boss letter was written in red ink, was 2 pages long, and contained several spelling and punctuation errors. The overall motivation of the author was evidently to mock investigative efforts and to allude to future murders. Dear Boss. Should I do this in a Cockney accent? Dear Boss, I keep on hearing the police have got me, but they won't fix me just yet. I've laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. That joke about the leather apron gave me real fits. I'm down on oars and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. Great work the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. How can they catch me now? I love my work and want to start again. You'll soon hear me with my funny little games. I saved some of the proper red stuff in a ginger beer bottle over the last job to write with, but it went thick like glue and I can't use it. Red ink is fit enough, I hope. The next job I do, I shall clip the lady's ears and send it off to police officers just for jolly, wouldn't ya? Keep this letter back till I do a bit more work, then give it out straight. My knife's so nice and sharp, I want to get to work right away if I get a chance. I can't do a Cockney accent, I keep slipping into Brooklyn. Good luck, yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Don't mind me giving the trade name. P.S. Wasn't good enough to post this before I got all the red ink off my hands. Curse it. No luck yet. They say I'm a doctor now. And then we need the Saucy Jackie postcard. The text of the postmarked and received on 1st October 1888, the postcard mentions that the two victims killed on 30th September were killed very close to one another, stating, double event this time. Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Edowis were both killed in the early morning of 30th September, and part of Edowis's ear was found attached to the crime scene as a result of the facial mutilations that the killer performed. Some authors have argued that the letter was sent before the murders were publicized, making it unlikely that a hoaxer would have such knowledge of the crime. But the letter was postmarked more than 24 hours after the killings took place, long after many details were known by journalists and residents of the area. The text of the postcard reads, I was not coddling the old boss when I gave you the tip. You'll hear about Saucy Jackie's work tomorrow, double event this time. Number one, squeal a bit, couldn't finish straight off. Had not time to get ears off for the police. Thanks for keeping the last letter back till I got to work again. Jack the Ripper. And now we come to the For Hell letter. The letter reads, From Hell, Mr. Lusk, Sir, I sent you half the kidney I took from when the woman persevered out of the t'other piece. I fried it and it was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife and took it out if you only wait a little while longer. Signed, catch me if you can, Mr. Lusk. Oh my goodness, this man's spelling is atrocious. But I suppose spelling was not high on his skill priority list. The letter came into possession of the City of London Police, being later transferred to the Metropolitan Police. The original letter and the kidney which accompanied it have since been lost or stolen, along with other contents that were contained in the Metropolitan Police Ripper files. But a photograph was taken of the From Hell letter. The original of this photograph has now disappeared. The image shown here is from the photograph. So we can see a copy of the photograph of the letter. Hundreds of letters claiming to be from the killer were posted at the time of the Ripper murders, but many researchers argue that the From Hell letter is one of a handful of possibly authentic writings received from the murderer. The author did not sign this correspondence with the Jack the Ripper pseudonym, distinguishing it from the early Dear Boss and Saucy Jack, as well as their many imitators. Furthermore, the handwriting in the Dear Boss letter and the Saucy Jackie postcard are markedly similar, but the handwriting from the From Hell letter is dissimilar. The letter was delivered to Lusk personally without reference to the police or the British government, which could indicate animosity towards Lusk or the local Whitechapel community of which he was a member. The primary reason this letter stands out more than any other is that it was delivered with a small box containing half of what doctors later determined was a human kidney which had been preserved in spirits. One of the murder victim Catherine Eddowes' kidneys had been removed by the killer. Medical opinion at the time was that the organ could have been acquired by medical students and sent with the letter as part of a hoax. Lusk himself believed that this was the case and did not report the letter until he was urged to do so by friends. Oh, there's a calligraphy and linguistic analysis. Wild. The Jack the Ripper murders are regarded as the first internationally publicized set of serial killings, with the perpetrator never conclusively identified. They've attracted much attention for decades, with fictional works referring specifically to the Lusk letter. The graphic novel From Hell, created by Alan Moore and Eddie Campbell, concerns the Ripper murders and takes its name from the letter. The work was originally published in serial form from 1989 to 1996, first collected in a single piece in 1999 and adapted into a 2001 feature film starring Johnny Depp and Heather Graham. The comic series features the actual killer as a main protagonist, going into his tortured mind and warped justifications for the murders. Cultural commentators such as Professor Elizabeth Ho have highlighted the way in which the work comments on the present's relationship to the past, with text and image placed in critical tension. That'd be cool. And the film. It's a period detective horror film. Oh, Johnny Depp is Frederick Aberline, lead investigator of the murders. It received mixed reviews from critics. Was negative compared with its source material. Let's be real, who can even hope to carry out like a good facsimile of an Alan Moore graphic novel? Many have tried, many have failed. This one is kind of creepy in a different way. On 21st August 1986, a limnic eruption at Lake Nyos in northwestern Cameroon killed 1,746 people and 3,500 livestock. The eruption triggered the sudden release of about 100 to 300,000 tons of carbon dioxide. The gas cloud initially rose at nearly 100 kilometers per hour, and then, being heavier than air, descended onto nearby villages, displacing all the air and suffocating people and livestock within 25 kilometers of the lake. A degassing system has been installed at the lake with the aim of reducing the concentration of CO2 in the water, and therefore the risk of further eruptions. Along with the Lake Monone disaster 2 years earlier, it is one of only 2 recorded limnic eruptions in history. What triggered the catastrophic outgassing is not known. Most geologists suspect a landslide, but some believe that a small volcanic eruption may have occurred on the bed of the lake. A third possibility is that cool rainwater falling on one side of the lake triggered the overturn. We're not reading this next part because there's a citation needed. The event resulted in the supersaturated deep water rapidly mixing with the upper layers of the lake, where the reduced pressure allowed the stored CO2 to effervesce out of solution. 1.2 cubic kilometers of gas was released. The normally blue waters of the lake turned a deep red after the outgassing due to the iron-rich water from the deep rising to the surface and being oxidized by the air. The level of the lake dropped by about 1 meter, and trees near the lake were knocked down. Trees were knocked down by this? God damn. Damn, nature, you scary. Scientists concluded from evidence that a 100-meter column of water and foam formed at the surface of the lake. 100 meters tall, spawning a wave of at least 25 meters that swept the shore on one side. Since carbon dioxide is 1.5 times the density of air, the cloud hugged the ground and moved down the valleys, where there were various villages. The mass was about 50 meters thick. Damn. And traveled downward at 20 to 50 kilometers per hour. So you could not outrun it. For roughly 23 kilometers, the gas cloud was concentrated enough to suffocate many people in their sleep in the villages of Nios, Cam, Cha, and Cebu. About 4,000 inhabitants fled the area, and many of these developed respiratory problems, lesions, and paralysis as a result of the gas cloud. It is a possibility that other volcanic gases were released along with the CO2, as some survivors reported the smell of gunpowder or rotten eggs, which indicates that sulfur dioxide or hydrogen sulfide were present at concentrations above their odor thresholds. However, CO2 was the only gas detected in samples of lake water, suggesting that this was the predominant gas released and as such the main cause of the incident. Reporters in the area described the scene as looking like the aftermath of a neutron bomb. One survivor, Joseph McQuain from Subum, described himself when he awoke after the gases had struck. I could not speak. I became unconscious. I could not open my mouth because then I smelled something terrible. I heard my daughter snoring in a terrible way, very abnormal. When crossing to my daughter's bed, I collapsed and fell. I was there till 9 o'clock in the morning of Friday the next day, until a friend of mine came and knocked at my door. I was surprised to see that my trousers were red and had some stains like honey. I saw some starchy mess on my body. My arms had some wounds. I didn't really know how I got these wounds. I opened the door. I wanted to speak. My breath would not come out. My daughter was already dead. I went into my daughter's bed thinking that she was still sleeping. I slept till it was 4:30 in the afternoon on Friday. Then I managed to go over to my neighbors' houses. They were all dead. I decided to leave because most of my family was in Wum. I got on my motorcycle. A friend whose father had died left with me for Wum. As I rode through Nios, I didn't see any sign of any living thing. When I got to Wum, I was unable to walk, even to talk. My body was completely weak. Following the eruption, many survivors were treated at the main hospital in Yaoundé, the country's capital. It was believed that many of the victims had been poisoned by sulfur-based gases. Poisoning by these gases would lead to burning pains in the eye and nose, coughing, and signs of asphyxiation similar to being strangled. Interviews with survivors and pathologic studies indicated that victims rapidly lost consciousness and that death was caused by CO2 asphyxiation. At non-lethal levels, CO2 can produce sensory hallucinations, such that many people exposed to CO2 report the odor of sulfuric compounds when none are present. Skin lesions form on survivors represent pressure sores, and in a few cases exposure to a heat source, but there's no evidence of chemical burns or flash burns from exposure to hot gases. Following the Lake Nyos disaster, scientists investigated other African lakes to see if a similar phenomenon could happen elsewhere. In 2005, Lake Kivu, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, 2,000 times larger than Lake Nyos, was also found to be supersaturated, and geologists found evidence that outgassing events around that lake happened about every 1,000 years. However, a study undertaken in 2018, released in 2020, found flaws in the 2005 study, indicating a possible bias in the conversion concentrations to partial pressures, to an overestimation of concentrations, or to a problem of calibration of sensors at high pressure. The 2020 study found that when these errors were accounted for, the risk of a gas eruption at Lake Kivu did not seem to be increasing over time. Still, fucking holy shit, wild that it could happen again. So that's kind of a different creepy, isn't it? Let's read about scaphism. Scaphism, from the Greek word for boat, also known as the boats, is an alleged ancient Persian method of execution mentioned by Plutarch in his life of Artaxerxes. It ostensibly entailed trapping the victim between two boats, feeding and covering them with milk and honey, and allowing them to fester and be devoured by insects and other vermin over time. The first mention of scaphism is Plutarch's description of the execution of the soldier Mithridates. Given his punishment by King Artaxerxes II for killing his brother Cyrus the Younger, who had rebelled in an attempt to claim the throne of the Achaemenid Empire. The king decreed that Mithridates should be put to death in boats, which execution is after the following manner. Taking 2 boats, framed exactly to fit and answer each other, they lie down in one of them, the malefactor that suffers, upon his back. Then covering it with the other, and so setting them together that the head, hands, and feet of him are left outside, and the rest of his body lies shut up within. Oh, the head, hands, and feet are outside the boats. They offer him food, and if he refused to eat it, they force him to do it by pricking his eyes. And then, after he has eaten, they drench him with a mixture of milk and honey, pouring it not only into his mouth, but all over his face. They then keep his face continually turned towards the sun, and it becomes completely covered up and hidden by the multitude of flies that settle on it. And as within the boats he does what those that eat and drink must needs do, creeping things and vermin spring out of the corruption and rottenness of the excrement, and these entering into the bowels of him, his body is consumed. When the man is manifestly dead, the uppermost boat being taken off, they find his flesh devoured, and swarms of such noisome creatures preying upon, and as it were, growing to his inwards. In this way, Mithridates, after suffering for 17 days, at last expired. Good God, that is awful. Let's read another one. The 12th century Byzantine chronicler Johannes Zonaras later described the punishment based on Plutarch. The Persians outvie all other barbarians in the horrid cruelty of their punishments, employing tortures that are peculiarly terrible and long drawn, namely the boats, and sewing men up in raw hides. But what is meant by the boats, I must now explain for the benefit of less well-informed readers. 2 boats are joined together one on top of the other, with holes cut in them in such a way that the victim's head, hands, and feet are only left outside. Within these boats, the man to be punished is placed lying on his back, and the boats then nailed together with bolts. Next, they pour a mixture of milk and honey into the wretched man's mouth, till he is filled to the point of nausea, smearing his face, feet, and arms with the same mixture, and so leave him exposed to the sun. This is repeated every day, the effect being that flies, wasps, and bees, attracted by the sweetness, settle on his face and all such parts of him as project outside the boats, and miserably torment and sting the wretched man. Moreover, his belly, distended as it is with milk and honey, throws off liquid excrements, and these putrefying breed swarms of worms, intestinal and of all sorts. Thus the victim lying in the boats, his flesh rotting away in his own filth and devoured by worms, dies a lingering and horrible death. Has this happened in fiction? In Shakespeare's The Winter Tale, in H. Rider Haggard's The Ancient Allen, Death by the Boat. In The Venture Bros, they describe it. Interesting. Now that is wild. Why don't we just go back to some murder, shall we? Some nice murder. This is not nice murder. This is not nice murder. All right, let's read about the Hinterkaifeck murders. The Hinterkaifeck murders occurred on the evening of 31st March, 1922, when 6 inhabitants of a small Bavarian farmstead, located approximately 70 kilometers north of Munich, Germany, were murdered by an unknown assailant. The 6 victims were Andreas Gruber, his wife Katzelia Gruber, their widowed daughter Victoria, Victoria's children Katzelia and Josef, and the maid Maria Baumgartner. They were all found struck dead with a mattock, also known as a grub axe. The perpetrators lived with the 6 corpses of their victims for 3 days. The murders are considered one of the most gruesome and puzzling unsolved crimes in German history. 4 of the dead bodies were found stacked up in the barn, the victims having been lured there one by one. Prior to the incident, the family and their former maid reported hearing strange noises coming from the attic, which led to that maid leaving. The case remains unsolved to this day. A mattock is this. A hand tool used for digging, prying, and chopping. The farm at Hinterkaifeck was built around 1863, and less than a year after the murders and the murder investigation, the farm was completely demolished. Additional evidence was revealed, including a mattock hid in the attic and a penknife found in the hay in the barn. Prelude. There were some strange occurrences in and around Hinterkaifeck some time shortly before the attack. 6 months prior to the attack, the family maid had quit. It had been widely claimed that her reason for leaving was that she had heard some strange sounds in the attic and believed the house to be haunted. Andreas Gruber found a strange newspaper from Munich on the property in March 1922. He could not remember buying it and initially believed that the postman had lost the newspaper. This was not the case, however, as no one in the vicinity subscribed to the paper. Just days before the murders, Gruber told neighbors he had discovered tracks in the fresh snow that led from the forest to a broken door lock in the farm's machine room. Later during the night, they heard footsteps in the attic, but Gruber found no one when he searched the building. Although he told several people about these alleged observations, he refused offers of help, and the details went unreported to the police. According to a school friend of the 7-year-old Katzelia Gabriel, the young girl reported that her mother Victoria had fled the farm the night before the act after a violent quarrel, and only hours later had been found in the forest. 31st March to April 1st, 1922. On the afternoon of Friday, the 31st March, 1922, the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, arrived at the farm. Maria's sister had escorted her there and left the farm for a short stay. After a short stay. She was most likely the last person to see the inhabitants alive. It appears that in the late evening, Victoria Gabriel, her 7-year-old daughter Katzelia, and her parents, Andreas and Katzelia, were lured to the family barn through the stable, where they were murdered, one at a time. The perpetrators used a mattock belonging to the family farm and killed the family with blows to the head. The perpetrators then moved into the living quarters, where, with the same murder weapon, they killed Joseph, sleeping in his bassinet, and Baumgartner in her bedchamber. 4 days passed between the murders and the discovery of the bodies. On the 1st of April, coffee sellers Hans Shirovsky and Edward Shirovsky arrived in Hinterkaifeck to take an order. When no one responded to the knocks on the door and the window, they walked around the yard but found no one. They noticed that the gate to the machine house was open, then decided to leave. Katzelia Gabriel was absent from school without excuse for the next few days, and the family failed to show up for Sunday worship. Assembler Alan Hoffner went to Hinterkaifeck on 4th April to repair an engine. He stated that he had not seen any of the family and had heard nothing but the sounds of the farm animals and the dog inside the barn. After waiting for an hour, he decided to start his repair, which he completed in roughly 4.5 hours. Around 3:30 p.m., Lorenz Schlittenbauer sent his son Johann and stepson Josef to Hinterkaifeck to see if they could make contact with the family. When they reported that they had not seen anyone, Schlittenbauer headed to the farm the same day with Michael Pohl and Jacob Siegel. Entering the barn, they found the bodies of Andreas Gruber, his wife Corceo, his daughter Victoria Gabriel, and his granddaughter Corceo. Shortly afterward, they found the chambermaid Maria Baumgartner and the youngest family member, Josef, murdered in the homestead. Inspector Georg Reingruber and his department investigated the killings. Initial investigations were hampered by the number of people who had interacted with the crime scene, moved bodies and items around, and even cooked and eaten meals in the kitchen. Ugh. The day after the discovery of the bodies, court physician Johann Baptist Anmuller performed autopsies in the barn. It was estimated that a mattock was the most likely murder weapon, although the weapon itself was not found at the scene. Evidence showed that the younger Corceo had been alive for several hours after the assault. She had torn her hair out in tufts while lying in the straw. The skulls of the victims were removed and sent to Munich for further examination. First suspecting the motive to be robbery, the police interrogated traveling craftsmen, vagrants, and several inhabitants from the surrounding villages, but they abandoned this theory when a large amount of money was found in the house. It was clear that the perpetrators had remained at the farm for several days. Someone had fed the cattle, consumed the entire supply of bread from the kitchen, and had recently cut meat from the pantry. With no clear motive to be gleaned from the crime scene, the police began to formulate a list of suspects. Despite repeated arrests, no murderer has ever been found, and the files were closed in 1955, 33 years later. The last interrogations took place in 1986 before Detective Chief Superintendent Konrad Mueller retired. In the inspection record of the court commission, it was noted that the victims were probably drawn to the barn by restlessness in the stable, resulting in noises from the animals. A later attempt, however, revealed that at least human screams from the barn could not be heard in the living area. On the night after the crime, 3 days before the bodies were discovered, the artisan Michael Prupel happened to pass by Hinterkaifeck. He observed that the oven had been heated by someone. That person approached him with a lantern and blinded him, whereupon he hastily continued on his way. Prupel also noticed that the smoke from the fireplace had a revolting smell. This incident was not followed up, and no investigation was conducted to determine what had been burned that night in the oven. On the 1st of April, at 3 a.m., the farmer and butcher, Simon Reislander, on his way home near Brunnen, saw two mysterious figures at the edge of the forest. When the strangers saw him, they turned around so that their faces could not be seen. Later, when he heard of the murders in Hinterkaifeck, he thought it possible that the strangers might be involved. In the middle of May 1927, a stranger was said to have stopped a resident at Weidhofen at midnight, asking questions about the murder, before shouting that he was the murderer, and then running into the woods. The stranger was never identified. Oof. This is like a regular old history sheet. Let's read the legacy. Many books and newspaper articles have been devoted to the murders. A series of articles by Josef Ludwig Hecker in the Schrobenhausener Zeitung, working on my German pronunciation, revived interest in the murders. A documentary film, Hinterkaifeck, Symbol des Unheimlichen, is based on the Leuschner book. Hans Fegert adapted the book, directed the film, and was the cameraman. Oh, it was shot on Super 8. The film was shown regularly in Ingolstadt. What's Ingolstadt? A city in the near area. 10 years later, Reinhard Keilig's play, Hinterkaifeck, Deutschland's geheimnisvollster Mordfall, was produced. And at the same time, Kurt K. Heiber produced another documentary. In 2007, 15 students of the Police Academy, Polizeifachhochschule, in Fürstenfeldbruck, examined the case using modern criminal investigation techniques. In their final report, they confirmed the meticulousness of the investigation at the time, but criticized the lack of professional forensics. In particular, the failure to take fingerprints was criticized, as this was already common practice at the time. Although it was almost certain that the murderers can no longer be identified, all authors of the report independently agreed on who the main suspect in the case was. However, his name was not mentioned out of consideration for his descendants. In 2017, the last chapter of The Man from the Train by Bill James and his daughter Rachel McCartney James briefly discusses the murders at Hinterkaifeck. The authors explain the possibility that the German crimes might have been committed by Paul Mueller, the titular serial killer the authors believe killed several families in the United States under similar circumstances between 1898 and 1912. The murders attributed to Mueller, including the Basilica Axe murders, were apparently random nighttime home invasions in or near small railroad towns that left entire families bludgeoned to death with the blunt end of an axe, and were probably motivated by a sadistic and necrophilic attraction to prepubescent girls. The author rated the chances of Mueller as the Hinterkaifeck killer as more or less a toss-up, but conclude there's no real reason to believe that it's not him. Was he on the list of suspects? I mean, yes, but at the very end. The Man from the Train is a true crime book. I suppose. I mean, it's possible. Let's read about the Flannan Isle Lighthouse. The Flannan Isle Lighthouse is a lighthouse near the highest point on Ili Moor and one of the Flannan Isles in the Outer Hebrides of Hebrides, that's how you pronounce that, right? Off the west coast of Scotland. It is best known for the mysterious disappearance of its keepers in 1900. History. Yep, let's go for the 1900 crew disappearance. The first record that something was abnormal on the Flannan Isles was on 15th December 1900, when the steamer Arctur, on a passage from Philadelphia to Leith, noticed in its log that the light was not operational in poor weather conditions. When the ship docked in Leith on 18 December 1900, the sighting was passed on to the Northern Lighthouse Board. The relief vessel, the lighthouse tender Hesperus, was unable to sail from Bresclet Lewis as planned on 20th December due to adverse weather. It did not reach the island until noon on the 26th of December. The lighthouse was manned by 3 men, James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur, with a rotating 4th man spending time on shore. On arrival, the crew of the Hesperus and the relief keeper found that the flagstaff held no flag. None of the usual provisions boxes had been left on the landing stage for restocking, and more ominously, none of the lighthouse keepers were there to welcome them ashore. Jim Harvey, the captain of the Hesperus, attempted to reach them by blowing the ship's whistle and firing a flare, but was unsuccessful. A boat was launched and Joseph Moore, the relief keeper, was put ashore alone. He found the entrance gate to the compound and the main door both closed, the beds unmade, and the clock unwound. Returning to the landing stage with this grim news, he then went back up to the lighthouse with Hesperus' second mate and a seaman. A further search revealed that the lamps there had been cleaned and refilled. A set of oilskins was found, suggesting that one of the keepers had left the lighthouse without them. There was no sign of any of the keepers, neither inside the lighthouse nor anywhere on the island. Moore and 3 volunteer seamen were left on the island to attend the light, and Hesperus returned to Lewis. Captain Harvey sent a telegram to the Northern Lighthouse Board dated 26 December 1900, stating, "A dreadful accident has happened at the Flannans." Wait, this guy is Irish. Scottish. "A dreadful accident has happened at the Flannans. The three keepers, Ducat, Marshall, and the Occasional, have disappeared from the island. The clocks were stopped and other signs indicated that the accident must have happened about a week ago. Poor fellows, they must have been blown over the cliffs or drowned trying to secure a crane." On Island Moor, the men scoured every corner of the island for clues as to the fate of the keepers. They found that everything was intact at the East Landing, but the West Landing provided considerable evidence of damage caused by recent storms. A box at 33 meters above sea level had been broken, and its contents strewn about. Iron railings were bent over, the iron railway by the path was wrenched out of its concrete, and a rock weighing more than a ton had been displaced. On top of the cliff at more than 60 meters above sea level, turf had been ripped away as far as 10 meters from the cliff edge. On 29 December 1900, Robert Muirhead, a Northern Lighthouse Board superintendent, arrived to conduct the official investigation into the incident. Muirhead had originally recruited all three of the missing men and knew them personally. He examined the clothing left behind in the lighthouse, concluded that Ducat and Marshall had gone down to the western landing stage, and that MacArthur, the Occasional, had left the lighthouse during heavy rain in his shirt sleeves. He noted that whoever left the light last and unattended was in breach of NLB rules. Gotta follow the rules. He also noted that some of the damage to the West Landing was difficult to believe unless actually seen. From the evidence I was able to procure, I was satisfied that the men had been on duty up until dinner time on Saturday the 15th of December, that they had gone down to secure a box in which the mooring ropes, landing ropes, etc. were kept, and which was secured in a crevice in the rock about 110 feet above sea level, and that an extra large sea had rushed up the face of the rock, had gone above them, and coming down with immense force, had swept them completely away. Whether this explanation brought any comfort to the families of the lost keepers. Ducat left a family of 4 children. MacArthur, a wife and 2 children, is unknown. This development did, however, tarnish the lighthouse's reputation for many years after the incident. No bodies were ever found, but there have been some mysterious sights resulting in fascinating national speculation in newspapers and periodicals of the era. Implausible stories ensued, such as that a sea serpent had carried them away, that they had arranged for a ship to take them away and start new lives, that they had been abducted by foreign spies, or that they had met their fate through the malevolent presence of a boat filled with ghosts. The baleful influence of the Phantom of 7 Hunters was widely suspected locally. More than 10 years later, the events were still being commemorated and elaborated on. The 1912 ballad Flannan Isle by Wilfred Wilson Gibson refers erroneously to an overturned chair and uneaten meal laid on the table, indicating that the keepers had been suddenly disturbed. However, in a first-hand account made by Moore, the relief keeper, he stated that the kitchen utensils were all very clean, which is a sign that it must be after dinner sometime they left. Yeah, I kind of want to, I wish they had taken pictures of the destruction. Over time, a story has developed of the existence of unusual logbook entries. They supposedly have Marshall saying on 12th December that there were severe winds the likes of which I have never seen before in 20 years. He is also said to have reported that Ducat had been very quiet and Donald MacArthur had been crying. MacArthur was a veteran mariner with a reputation for brawling, thus it would be strange for him to be crying in response to a storm. Log entries on 13 December were said to have stated that the storm was still raging and that all 3 men had been praying. This is also puzzling, as 3 men were experienced lighthouse keepers who knew they were in a secure structure 150 feet above sea level and should have known they were safe inside. Furthermore, there have been no reported storms in the area on the 12th, 13th, 14th of December. The final log entry is said to have been made on 15th December, saying, storm ended, sea calm, God is over all. However, an investigation by Mike Dash of the Fort Wayne Times revealed that the logbooks were fictional, later additions to the story. Yeah, gotta get those logbooks right. Subsequently, researchers have taken into account the geography of the Isles. The coastline of Elliot Moor is deeply indented with narrow gillies called geos. The West Landing, which is situated in such a geo, terminates in a cave. In high seas or storms, water would rush into the cave and then explode out again with considerable force. It was possible MacArthur may have seen a series of large waves approaching the island and, knowing the likely danger of his colleagues, ran down to warn them, only to be washed away as well in a violent swell. Recent research by James Lowe discovered that Marshall was previously fined 5 shillings when his equipment was washed away during a huge gale. It is likely, in seeking to avoid another fine, that he and Ducat tried to secure their equipment during a storm and were swept away as a result. Man saves 5 shillings and not the best result. The fate of MacArthur, although required to stay behind to man the lighthouse, can be guessed to be the same. James Love speculates that MacArthur probably tried to warn or help his colleagues and was swept away too. This theory also has the advantages of explaining the set of oilskins remaining indoors and MacArthur's coat remaining on its peg, although perhaps not the closed door and gate. Another theory is based on the first-hand experiences of Walter Aldeburgh, a keeper on the Flanders from 1953 to 1957. He believed one man may have been washed into the sea, but then his companions, who were trying to rescue him, were washed away by more rogue waves. A further proposal is based on the psychology of the keepers. Allegedly, MacArthur was a volatile character. This may have led to a fight breaking out near the cliff edge by the West Landing that caused all 3 men to fall to their deaths. And apparently BuzzFeed Unsolved did a true crime episode about this with hosts Ryan Bergara and Shane Medage. I only point this out because my wife is super into BuzzFeed Unsolved and Ryan and Shane, and she watches all their stuff. There you go. had to put something on here. Let's read about the euthanasia coaster. The euthanasia coaster is a hypothetical steel roller coaster designed as a euthanasia device to kill its passengers. The concept was conceived in 2010 and made into a scale model by Lithuanian artist Julijonas Urbonas, a PhD candidate at the Royal College of Art in London. Urbonas, who had experience as an amusement park employee, stated that the goal of his concept roller coaster is to take lives with elegance and euphoria. As for practical applications of his design, Urbonas mentioned euthanasia or execution. John Allen, who served as president of the Philadelphia Toboggan Company, inspired Urbonas with his description of the ultimate roller coaster as one that sends out 24 people and they all come back dead. The concept design of the layout begins with a steep angled lift that takes riders up 500 meters to the top. A climb that takes a few minutes to reach, allowing the user to contemplate their life. For comparison, the tallest roller coaster in the world is King Dakar at only 139 meters. So this is more than 3 times taller than the highest roller coaster in existence. From there, the user will be asked once more if they would wish to die. If they have changed their minds, they may exit the coaster. If not, they would have some time to say their last words and press a button to continue to a 500-meter drop, which would take the train to 360 kilometers per hour, close to its terminal velocity, before flattening out and speeding into the first of its 7 slightly clothoid inversions. Each inversion would have a smaller diameter than the one before in order to maintain the lethal 10G to passengers while the train loses speed. After a sharp right-hand turn, the train would enter a straight where unloading of corpses and loading of new passengers could take place. The euthanasia coaster would kill its passengers through prolonged cerebral hypoxia or insufficient oxygen supply to the brain. The ride's 7 inversions would inflict 10G of force on its passengers for 60 seconds, causing G-force related symptoms starting with gray out through tunnel vision to blackout, eventually G-lock or G-force induced loss of consciousness. Subsequent inversions or another run of the coaster would serve as insurance against unintentional survival of more robust passengers. Urbosa's concept drew media attention when shown as part of the Human Plus display at the Science Gallery in Dublin, Ireland. Yep. From April through June 2011. I know where Dublin, Ireland is. I was just seeing. I have that link purpled, and I think I remember reading about Dublin when I was reading about, what's the guy? The guy who wrote about Dublin. The guy who wrote about Dublin. Culture. James Joyce. Ulysses. Yep, James Joyce. The display, designated as its 2011 flagship exhibition by the Science Gallery, aims to show the future of humans and technology. Within this theme, the euthanasia coaster highlights the issues that come with life extension. The item was also displayed at the Human Plus exhibit at Centre de Cultura Contemporánea de Barcelona in 2015. In 2012, Norwegian rock group Major Parkinson released Euthanasia Roller Coaster, a digital single with lyrics alluding to Urbosa's Euthanasia Coaster. Huh. I mean, look at the thing. So essentially, it's the best way to die, right? It's the best way to be executed. It's elegance and euphoria. I don't know. Is that really where technology and humans is headed? That's quite the statement there. All right, let's read about Rosemary Kennedy. Rosemary Kennedy was the eldest daughter born to Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. and Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy. She was a sister of President John F. Kennedy and Senators Robert F. and Ted Kennedy. In her very early young adult years, Rosemary Kennedy experienced seizures and violent mood swings. In response to these issues, her father arranged a prefrontal lobotomy for her in 1941 when she was 23 years old of age. The procedure left her permanently incapacitated and rendered her unable to speak intelligibly. Rosemary Kennedy spent most of the rest of her life being cared for at St. Coletta, an institution in Jefferson, Wisconsin. The truth about her situation and whereabouts was kept secret for decades. While she was initially isolated from her siblings and extended family following the lobotomy, Rosemary did go on to visit them during her later life. All right. According to Rosemary's sister, Eunice Kennedy Shriver, when Rosemary returned to the United States from the United Kingdom in 1940, she became increasingly irritable and difficult at the age of 22. Rosemary would often experience convulsions and fly into violent rages in which she would hit and injure others during this period. After being expelled from a summer camp in western Massachusetts and staying only a few months at Philadelphia boarding school, Rosemary was sent to a convent school in Washington, D.C. Rosemary began sneaking out of the convent school at night. The nuns of the convent thought Rosemary might be involved with sexual partners and that she could contract a sexually transmitted disease or become pregnant. Her occasionally erratic behavior frustrated her parents. Her father was especially worried that Rosemary's behavior would shame and embarrass the family and damage his and his children's political careers. When Rosemary was 23 years old, doctors told her father that a form of psychosurgery known as a lobotomy would help calm her mood swings and stop her occasional violent outburst. Joseph Kennedy decided that Rosemary should have a lobotomy. However, he did not inform his wife of this decision until after the procedure was completed. The procedure took place in November 1941. In Ronald Kessler's 1996 biography of Joseph Kennedy, titled The Sins of the Father, James W. Watts, who carried out the procedure with Walter Freeman, described the procedure to Kessler as follows. After Rosemary was mildly sedated, we went through the top of the head, Dr. Watts recalled. I think she was awake. She had a mild tranquilizer. We made a surgical incision in the brain through the skull. It was near the front. It was on both sides. We just made a small incision, no more than an inch. The instrument Dr. Watts used looked like a butter knife. He swung it up and down to cut brain tissue. We put an instrument inside, he said. As Dr. Watts cut, Dr. Freeman asked Rosemary some questions. For example, he asked her to recite the Lord's Prayer or sing God Bless America or count backwards. We made an estimate on how far to cut based on how she responded. When Rosemary began to become incoherent, they stopped. Watts told Kessler that in his opinion, Rosemary did not have mental retardation, but rather had a form of depression. A review of all the papers written by the two doctors confirmed Watts' declaration. All the patients the two doctors lobotomized were diagnosed as having some form of mental disorder. Bertram S. Brown, director of the National Institute of Mental Health, who was previously an aide to President Kennedy, told Kessler that Joe Kennedy referred to his daughter Rosemary as mentally handicapped rather than mentally ill in order to protect John's reputation for a presidential run, and that the family's lack of support for mental illness is part of a lifelong family denial of what was really so. It quickly became apparent that the procedure had caused immense harm. Kennedy's mental capacity diminished to that of a 2-year-old child. She could not walk or speak intelligibly and was incompetent. After the lobotomy, Rosemary was immediately institutionalized. She initially lived for several years at Craig House, a private psychiatric hospital 90 minutes north of New York City. In 1949, she was relocated to Jefferson, Wisconsin, where she lived for the rest of her life on the grounds of the St. Coletta School for the Exceptional Children, formerly known as St. Coletta Institute for Backward Youth. Archbishop Richard Cushing had told her father about St. Coletta's, an institution for more than 300 people with disabilities, and her father traveled to and built a private house for her about a mile outside St. Coletta's main campus, near Alverna House, which was designated for adults who needed lifelong care. The nuns called the house the Kennedy Cottage. Two Catholic nuns, Sister Margaret Ann and Sister Leona, provided her care along with a student and a woman who worked on ceramics with Rosemary 3 nights a week. Rosemary had a car that could be used to take her for rides, and a dog which she could take on walks. In response to her condition, Rosemary's parents separated her from her family. Rose Kennedy did not visit her for 20 years. Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. did not visit his daughter at the institution at all. In Rosemary, the hidden Kennedy daughter, author Kate Clifford Larson stated that Rosemary's lobotomy was hidden from the family for 20 years. None of her siblings knew of her whereabouts. While her older brother John was campaigning for re-election in the Senate in 1958, the Kennedy family explained away her absence by claiming she was reclusive. The Kennedy family did not publicly explain her absence until 1961, after John had been elected president. The Kennedys did not reveal that she was institutionalized because of a failed lobotomy, but instead said that she had been deemed mentally handicapped. In 1961, after Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. had a stroke that left him unable to speak and walk, Rosemary's siblings were made aware of her location. Her lobotomy did not become public knowledge until 1987. Following her father's death in 1969, the Kennedys gradually involved Rosemary in family life again. Rosemary was occasionally taken to visit relatives in Florida and Washington, D.C., and to her childhood home on Cape Cod. By that time, Rosemary had learned to walk again, but did so with a limp. She never regained the ability to speak clearly, and her arm was palsied. Her condition is sometimes credited as the inspiration for the Eunice Kennedy Shriver to later found the Special Olympics. Although Shriver told the New York Times in 1995 that Rosemary was just one of the disabled people she would have over to her house to swim, and that the game should not focus on any single individual. Rosemary Kennedy died from natural causes on January 7, 2005, age 86, at the Fort Atkinson Memorial Hospital in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin, with her siblings by her side. She was buried beside her parents in Hollywood Cemetery in Brooklyn, Massachusetts. God, that's awful. Also, is this the same as Rosemary's Baby? Is this the same thing? No, it is not. Okay. The Roman Polanski film, but I guess the situation was not even known until a year after. No, 1987, 1968, okay. Quite a few years after. Oh, that's horrifying. Just keep talking, and we'll keep cutting. Horrifying. I hope the music is still not copyrighted. It would be horrible if all of this just couldn't be copyrighted. Let's read about Karl Tänzler. Georg Karl Tänzler was a German-born radiology technologist and Marine Hospital at the Marine Hospital Service in Key West, Florida. He developed an obsession with a young Cuban-American tuberculosis patient, Elena Helen Milagro de Hoyos, that carried on well after her death. In 1933, almost 2 years after her death, Tänzler removed Hoyos' body from its tomb and lived with the corpse at his home for 7 years until its discovery by Hoyos' relatives and the authorities in 1940. On April 22, 1930, while working at the Marine Hospital in Key West, Tänzler met Maria Elena Helen Milagro de Hoyos, a local Cuban-American woman who had been brought to the hospital by her mother for an examination. Tänzler immediately recognized her as the beautiful dark-haired woman that had been revealed to him in his earlier visions. By all accounts, Hoyos was viewed as the local beauty in Key West. Where's these visions? During his childhood in Germany and later while traveling briefly in Genoa, Italy, Tänzler claimed to have been visited by visions of a dead, purported ancestor, Countess Anna Constantinia von Kossel, who revealed the face of his true love, an exotic dark-haired woman, to him. Elena was the daughter of local cigar maker Francisco Pancho Hoyos and Aurora Milagro. She had two sisters, Florinda Nana Milagro Hoyos, who married Mario Medina and also succumbed to tuberculosis, and Celina Milagro Hoyos. Medina, Nana's husband, was electrocuted trying to rescue a co-worker who had hit a power line with his crane at a construction site. This history is crazy. On February 18th, 1926, Elena married Luis Mesa, the son of Caridad and Isaac Mesa. Isaac Mesa, we found the Isaac. Mesa left Elena shortly after she suffered a miscarriage of the couple's child and moved to Miami. Elena was legally married to Mesa at the time of her death. Elena was eventually diagnosed with tuberculosis, a typically fatal disease at the time that eventually claimed the lives of almost all of her immediate family. Tensler, with his self-professed medical knowledge, attempted to treat and cure Elena with a variety of medicines, as well as X-ray and electrical equipment that were brought to the Hoyos' home. Tensler showered Elena with gifts of jewelry and clothing, and allegedly professed his love to her, but no evidence has surfaced to show that any of his affection was reciprocated by Elena. Despite Tensler's best efforts, Elena died of tuberculosis at her parents' home in Key West on October 25th, 1931. Tensler paid for her funeral, and with the permission of her family, he then commissioned the construction of an above-ground mausoleum in the Key West Cemetery, which he visited almost every night. One evening in April 1933, Tensler crept through the cemetery where Elena was buried and removed her body from the mausoleum, carting it through the cemetery after dark on a toy wagon, and transported it back to his home. He reportedly said that Elena's spirit would come to him when he would sit by her grave and serenade her corpse with a favorite Spanish song. He also said that she would often tell him to take her from the grave. Tensler attached the corpse's bones together with piano wire and fitted the face with glass eyes. As the skin of the corpse decomposed, Tensler replaced it with silk cloth soaked in wax and plaster of Paris. As the hair fell out of Elena's decomposing scalp, Tensler fashioned a wig from her hair, which he had previously obtained from her mother. Tensler filled the corpse's abdominal and chest cavity with rags to keep the original form, dressed Elena's remains in stockings, jewelry, and gloves, and kept the body in his bed. Tensler used copious amounts of perfume, disinfectants, and preserving agents to mask the odor and forestall the effects of the corpse's decomposition. In October 1940, Elena's sister Florinda heard rumors of Tensler sleeping with the disinterred body of her sister and confronted Tensler at his home, where Elena's body was eventually discovered. He was also caught dancing with her corpse in front of an open window. Florinda notified the authorities, and Tensler was arrested and detained. Tensler was psychiatrically examined and found mentally competent to stand trial on the charge of wantonly and maliciously destroying a grave and removing a body without authorization. After a preliminary hearing on October 9, 1940 at the Monroe County Courthouse in Key West, Tensler was held to answer on the charge, but the case was eventually dropped, and he was released, as the statute of limitations for the crime had expired. Shortly after the corpse was discovered by authorities, Elena's body was examined by physicians and pathologists and put on public display at the Dean Lopez Funeral Home, where it was viewed by as many as 6,800 people. Elena's body was eventually returned to the Key West Cemetery, where the remains were buried in an unmarked grave in a secret location to prevent further tampering. The facts underlying the case and the preliminary hearing drew much interest from the media at the time and created a sensation among the public, both regionally and nationwide. The public mood was generally sympathetic to Tensler, whom many viewed as an eccentric romantic. Jesus. Though not reported contemporaneously, research, most notably by authors Harrison and Sweisgood, has revealed evidence of Tensler's necrophilia with Elena's corpse. Two physicians who attended the 1940 autopsy of Elena's remains recalled in 1972 that a vaginal tube had been inserted into the vaginal area of the corpse to allow for intercourse. Others contend that since no evidence of necrophilia was presented at the 1940 preliminary hearing, and because the physician's proof surfaced in 1972, over 30 years after the case had been dismissed, that the necrophilia allegation is questionable. Woof. In 1944, Tanzler moved to Pasco County, Florida, close to wherever, where he wrote an autobiography that appeared in the pulp publication Fantastic Adventures in 1947. His home was near his wife Doris. This man still managed to get married. After writing an autobiography about how he dug up and slept with a corpse. Good God. His wife Doris, who apparently helped support Tanzler in his later years. He received United States citizenship in 1950. Separated from his obsession, Tanzler used a death mask, a likeness of a person's face after their death, to create a life-sized effigy of Elena, and lived with it until his death at age 75 on July 3rd, 1952. His body was discovered on the floor of his home 3 weeks after his death. It has been recounted that Tanzler was found in the arms of Elena's effigy upon the discovery of his corpse, but his obituary reported that he died on the floor behind one of his organs. The obituary recounted a metal cylinder on a shelf above a table. A metal cylinder on a shelf above a table, in it, wrapped in silken cloth and robes, was a waxen image. I guess that's the death mask. It has been written that Tanzler had the bodies switched, or that Elena's remains were secretly returned to him, and that he died with the real body of Elena. Not good. The story of Tanzler and Elena would be reproduced in pulp magazines in the years following his death, with various parties adding new details to the case. An article written by Mikhail Felder in 1982 tells of how renovation workers found a note allegedly written by Tanzler confessing to have killed Elena by poisoning her. She died because I gave this to her mercifully. I mixed the root of wolfsbane with aconite diluted. It was palatable, and my love departed this miserable world on October 25th, 1931. Suffer no more, sweet Elena. I have sent you to the angels with my golden elixir. Perez also claimed Tanzler had once told him that he would kill Elena if necessary to fulfill his destiny. The Poison Confession letter article was also cited by historian David L. Sloan on episode 44 of the Night America podcast. Night America is a great title for a podcast. Lots of people have talked about this one. Indeed, indeed, indeed. Ooh. What ones have we not done yet? There's quite a lot here. What about Cotard's syndrome? Named after French neurologist and psychiatrist Jules Cotard. Cotard syndrome, also known as Cotard's delusion or walking corpse syndrome, is a rare mental disorder in which the affected person holds the delusional belief that they are dead, do not exist, are putrefying, or have lost their blood or internal organs. Statistical analysis of a 100-patient cohort indicated that denial of self-existence is present in 45% of the cases. The other 55% of the patients presented with delusions of immortality. So you either believe that you are dead and gone, or you believe that you cannot die. In 1880, the neurologist and psychiatrist Jules Cotard described the condition as the delirium of negation, a psychiatric syndrome of varied severity. A mild case is characterized by despair and self-loathing, while a severe case is characterized by intense delusions of negation and chronic psychiatric depression. The case of Mademoiselle X describes a woman who denied the existence of parts of her body and of her need to eat. She claimed that she was condemned to an eternal damnation and therefore could not die a natural death. In the course of experiencing the delirium of negation, Mademoiselle X died of starvation. The patient usually denies their own existence, the existence of a certain body part, or the existence of a portion of their body. There's 3 stages. The germination stage, symptoms of psychotic depression and of hypochondria. The blooming stage, the full development of the syndrome and delusions of negation. And the chronic stage, continued severe delusions along with chronic psychiatric depression. Cotard syndrome withdraws the person from the condition. Cotard syndrome withdraws the person with the condition from other people. Cotard syndrome withdraws the person with the condition from other people due to neglect of their personal hygiene and physical health. Delusions of negation of self prevent the patient from making sense of external reality, which then produces a distorted view of the external world. The article Betwixt Life and Death, Case Studies of the Cotard Delusion, 1996, describes a contemporary case of Cotard syndrome which occurred in a Scotsman whose brain was damaged by a motorcycle accident. The patient's symptoms occurred in the context of more general feelings of unreality and of being dead. In January 1990, after his discharge from a hospital in Edinburgh, his mother took him to South Africa. He was convinced that he had been taken to hell, which was confirmed by the heat, and that he had died of sepsis, which had been a risk early in his recovery, or perhaps from AIDS. He had read a story of the Scotsman about someone with AIDS who died from sepsis, or from an overdose of a yellow fever injection. He thought that he had borrowed his mother's spirit to show him around hell, and that she was asleep in Scotland. Now, I know Elon Musk is from there, but you can't just go around calling South Africa hell. The article, Recurrent Post-Ictal Depression with Cotard Delusion, describes the case of a 14-year-old epileptic boy who experienced Cotard syndrome after seizures. His mental history showed themes of death, chronic sadness, decreased physical activity and leisure time, self-withdrawal, and disturbed biological functions. About twice a year, the boy had episodes that lasted between 3 weeks and 3 months. In the course of each episode, he said that everything and everyone was dead, including trees, described himself as a dead body, and warned the world would be destroyed within hours. Throughout the episode, the boy showed no response to pleasurable stimuli and had no interest in social activities. One patient, called WI for privacy reasons, was diagnosed after experiencing significant traumatic brain damage. Damage to the cerebral hemisphere, the frontal lobe, and the ventricular system was apparent to WI's doctors after examining magnetic resonance imaging and computer tomography scans, MRIs and CTs. In January 1990, WI was discharged to outpatient care. Although his family has made arrangements for him to travel abroad, he continued to experience significant, persistent visual difficulties, which provoked a referral for ophthalmological assessment. Former visual testing then led to the discovery of further damage. For several months after the initial trauma, WI continued to experience difficulty recognizing familiar faces, places, and objects. He was also convinced that he was dead and experienced feelings of derealization. Google derealization, hate what you find. Later in 1990, after being discharged from the hospital, WI had convinced that he had gone to hell after dying of either AIDS or sepsis. Well, that's wild. Why the same things? When WI finally sought out neurological testing in May 1990, he was no longer fully convinced that he was dead, although he still suspected it. Further testing revealed that WI was able to distinguish between dead and alive individuals, with the exception of himself. When W.I. was treated for depression, his delusions of his own death diminished in a month. Whew. So here's another English guy, but not the Scottish guy that we read about before. Whew. I gotta say, some of these are quite wild. All right, this is the story of Joyce Vincent, an English woman whose death went unnoticed for more than 2 years as her corpse lay undiscovered at her bedside in North London. Prior to her death, she had cut off nearly all contact with those who knew her. She resigned from her job in 2001 and moved to a shelter for victims of domestic abuse. Around the same time, she began to reduce contact with her friends and family. She died sometime in December 2003. Her remains were discovered on 25th January 2006, with the cause of death believed to either be an asthma attack or complications from a recent peptic ulcer. What's a peptic ulcer? Okay, it's a stomach ulcer. Vincent lived above the shopping city in Wood Green in North London in a housing trust flat. The cause of her death is unknown, as is the date, though it is speculated to be around December 2003. She suffered from asthma and had a peptic ulcer at the time of her death. So some have suggested that an asthma attack or complications surrounding her ulcer as a possible cause. Her remains were described as mostly skeletal, according to a pathologist, and she was lying on her back next to a shopping bag, surrounded by Christmas presents she had wrapped but never delivered. It is not known to whom the presents were addressed. The refrigerator in her bedsit contains food with 2003 expiry date labels. Neighbors had assumed the flat was unoccupied, and the odor of decomposing body tissue was attributed to nearby waste bins. The flat's windows did not allow direct sight to the inside. It was a noisy building, which may explain why no one questioned the constant noise from the television, which remained turned on until she was discovered. Half of her rent was being automatically paid to Metropolitan Housing Trust by benefits agencies, leading officials to believe that she was still alive. With over 2 years' worth of unpaid rent totaling £2,400 that had accrued, housing officials decided to repossess the property. Her corpse was discovered on 25th January 2006 when bailiffs had forced entry into the flat. The television and heating were still running due to debt forgiveness, and her bills were being continually paid through automatic debit. The Victorian Housing Trust said that due to housing benefits covering the cost of rent for some period after Vincent's death, arrears had not been realized until much later. The trust also said that no concerns were raised by neighbors or visitors at any time during the 2 years between her death and the discovery of the body. Vincent's remains were too badly decomposed to conduct a full post-mortem, and she had to be identified through dental records. Police ruled death by natural causes as there was nothing to suggest foul play. The front door was double locked, and there was no sign of a break-in. At the time of her death, she had a boyfriend, but the police were unable to locate him. Her sisters had hired a private detective to look for her and contacted the Salvation Army, but these attempts proved unsuccessful. The detective found the house where Vincent was living, and the family wrote letters to her, receiving no response as she was already dead by this time. As a result, the family concluded that she had deliberately broken ties with them. The Glasgow Herald reported, her friends noted her as someone who fled the signs of trouble, who walked out of jobs if she clashed with a colleague, who moved from one flat to the next all over London. She didn't answer the phone to her sister and didn't appear to have her own circle of friends, instead relying on the company of relative strangers who came with a package of a new boyfriend, a college, or flatmate, a colleague. Dang. Well, that was just sad. Undelivered Christmas presents. Now there is a sad situation. All right, I think we're gonna do the last one now. This is the Demon Core, which you may already know about. It's a pretty popular one to talk about this time of year, but we will talk about the Demon Core. The Demon Core was a sphere of plutonium that was involved in 2 fatal radiation accidents when scientists tested it as a fissile core of an early atomic bomb. It was manufactured by the Manhattan Project, the U.S. nuclear weapons development effort during World War II. It was a subcritical mass that weighed 6.2 kilograms and was 89 meters in diameter. The core was prepared for shipment to the Pacific Theater as part of the 3rd nuclear weapon to be dropped on Japan, but when Japan surrendered, the core was retained for testing and potential later use in case of another conflict. The 2 criticality accidents occurred at the Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico on August 21st, 1945 and May 21st, 1946. In both cases, an experiment was intended to demonstrate how close the core was to criticality with a tamper, but the core was accidentally put into a critical configuration. Physicist Harry Daghlian in the first accident and Louis Slotin in the second suffered acute radiation syndrome and died soon after, while others present in the lab were also exposed. The core was melted down in the summer of 1946, and the material recycled for use in other cores. The first incident. The core assembled was designed to be at -5 cents, which is a unit of reactivity for a nuclear reactor. In this state, there's only a small safety margin against extraneous factors that might increase reactivity, causing the core to become supercritical and then prompt critical, a brief state of rapid energy increase. These factors are not common in the environment. There are circumstances like the compression of the solid metallic core, the addition of more nuclear material, or the provision of an external reflector which would reflect outbound neutrons back into the core. The experiment conducted at Los Alamos leading to the 2 fatal accidents were designed to guarantee that the core was indeed close to the critical point by arranging such reflectors and seeing how much neuron reflection was required to approach supercriticality. On August 21st, the plutonium core produced a burst of neuron radiation that led to physicist Harry Daghlian's death. Daghlian made a mistake while performing the neutron reactor experiments to the core. He was working alone. A security guard, Private Robert J. Hemmerly, was seated at a desk 10 to 12 feet away. The core was placed within a stack of neuron-reflective tungsten carbide bricks, and the addition of each brick moved the assembly closer to criticality. While attempting to stack another brick around the assembly, Daghlian accidentally dropped it onto the core, and thereby caused the core to go well into supercriticality, a self-sustaining critical chain reaction. He quickly removed the brick off the assembly, but received a fatal dose of radiation. He died 25 days later from acute radiation poisoning. On May 21st, 1946, physicist Louis Slotin and 7 other personnel were in a Los Alamos laboratory conducting another experiment to verify the closeness of the core to criticality by the positioning of neuron reflectors. Slotin, who was leaving Los Alamos, was showing the technique to Alan C. Graves, who would use it in a final test before the Operation Crossroads nuclear tests scheduled a month later at Bikini Atoll. It required the operator to place 2 half-spheres of beryllium, a neuron reflector, around the core to be tested and manually lower the top reflector over the core using a thumb hole as the polar point. As the reflectors were manually moved closer and farther away from each other, neuron deflectors indicated the core's neutron multiplication rate. The experimenter needed to maintain a slight separation between the reflector halves to allow enough neurons to escape from the core in order to stay below criticality. The standard protocol was to use shims between the halves, as allowing them to close completely would result in the instantaneous formation of a critical mass and a lethal power excursion. So basically, they had these shells, and the more closed the shells got, the closer the reactor got to going supercritical. And they used a shim, such as this screwdriver, to keep it from going supercritical. Under Slotin's own unapproved protocol, the shims were not used. Why? The top half of the reflector was resting directly on the bottom half at one point, while 180 degrees from this point, a gap was maintained by the blade of a flat-tipped screwdriver in Slotin's hand. The size of the gap between the reflectors was changed by twisting the screwdriver. Slotin, who was given to bravado, became the local expert, performing the test on almost a dozen occasions, often in his trademark blue jeans and cowboy boots, in front of a room full of observers. Enrico Fermi reportedly told Slotin and others that they would be dead within a year if they continued performing the test in that manner. Scientists referred to this flirting with the possibility of a nuclear chain reaction as tickling the dragon's tail, based on a remark by physicist Richard Feynman, who compared the experiments to tickling the tail of a sleeping dragon. So this man was an idiot. He was one of those smart idiots, right? He was smart enough to think that he couldn't be an idiot, and therefore was 100% an idiot. Oh. On the day of the accident, Slotin's screwdriver slipped outward a fraction of an inch while he was lowering the top reflector, allowing the reflector to fall into place around the core. Instantly, there was a flash of blue light and a wave of heat across Slotin's skin. The core had become supercritical, releasing an intense burst of neutron radiation, estimated to have lasted about half a second. Slotin quickly twisted his wrist, flipping the top shelf to the floor. The heating of the core and the shell stopped the criticality within seconds of its initiation, while Slotin's reaction prevented a recurrence and ended the incident. The position of Slotin's body over the apparatus also shielded the others from much of the neutron radiation, but he received a lethal dose of 1,000 rad and neutron and 114 rad gamma radiation in under a second, and died 9 days later from acute radiation poisoning. So, yeah, the flippin' fallout radiation meter, it's like, you received 200 rads. Yeah, nah. The nearest person to Slotin, Graves, who was watching over Slotin's shoulder and thus partially shielded by him, received a high but non-lethal radiation dose. He was hospitalized for several weeks with severe radiation poisoning. He died 19 years later of a heart attack, which may have been hereditary. The drawing based on the above sketch. God, this guy was dumb. 4 men injured through accidental exposure to radiation in the government's atomic library have been discharged from the hospital, and immediate condition of 4 others is satisfactory. Ugh. I mean, everybody here is dead now. One guy survived until 2001 at least. After these incidents, the core, originally known as Rufus, was referred to as the Demon Core. There you go. The demon's name is Rufus. Hands-on criticality experiments were stopped, and remote control machines and TV cameras were designed by Schreiber, one of the survivors, to perform such experiments with all personnel at a quarter-mile distance. Well, thank fuck. The Demon Core was intended for use in the Operation Crossroads nuclear tests, but after the criticality accident, time was needed for its radioactivity to decline and for it to be reevaluated for the effects of the fission products it held, some of which were highly neutron poisonous to the desired level of fission. The next two cores were shipped for use in Able and Baker, and the Demon Core was scheduled to be shipped later for the third test of the series, provisionally named Charlie, but that test was canceled due to the unexpected level of radioactivity resulting from the underwater Baker test and an inability to decontaminate the target warships. The core was melted down in summer 1946, and the material recycled for use in other cores. Ooh, so still out there. Rufus the Demon Core, still out there. Gasp. All right. But I think with Rufus, we can end this stream. I'm gonna make a little raid message for myself. If you're in chat and you would like to join me in this raid message, feel free to. We can also go to the global emotes. There we go. I like that. So there's the raid message for today, and we're gonna wrap things up here. Woo! There was a lot of crazy stuff that's happened. I mean, honestly, are we all in agreement that the wildest one was definitely the Lake Niles disaster? I mean, eating people, believing you're dead, lots of creepy stuff here. But yeah, just an eruption that blankets the ground in CO2. It sounds horrible. All right, if you are in chat, please join me in copying the raid message, as we are going to go raid a good friend of the channel, Bunikila, a spooky VTuber. Happy Spooks Month. Oh. And other than that, I think it's time for me to say goodbye. So thank you so much for joining me. This has been surprisingly fun. I love reading Wikipedia. It's one of my favorite things to do. And I learned so much. All sorts of creepy things to unleash upon, I don't know, the people that play D&D with. But until next time, my name is Isaac Anzu. Thank you so much for joining, and I will catch you next time. Farewell.